Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Stephen King podcast. And we're up to episode 49. So we're closing in on the big 50.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! We're going to have to find some good way to celebrate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Today we are going to talk about the collection Nightshift. And we're going to talk about the stories in it. And Lou and I have put together a top 3 of the stories. And we haven't compared them yet, so it will be interesting to see if we have the same top 3 stories.
Mm-hmm.
And a while back ago, I also asked you listeners to mention your top 3 on the Facebook page, and a few of you have, and I have put them together for a list as well to see which story you like the best. So, welcome, and we will start with the news.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room. All right, and first up is a cancellation, and it's for Haven. But is that really a cancellation, or is that just the normal end of the series? There's always seems to have been some confusion about this, because when it first came up that they were filming 26 episodes for season 5, we were kind of going, that's kind of weird. Why would they double the episode order number? Because traditionally the seasons have been 13 episodes. So the show is ending its run this year. It's starting in October. And I've always thought of this as season 6. So I guess it depends on how you feel about it. Some people are calling it season 5 part 2, but for me, this is really season 6.
Yeah, I think that's the official name for it is season 5 part 2, because the previous season has been released on DVD, and that is called season 5 part 1.
Yeah.
So. And I really don't like it when they do this dividing of seasons. But I remember way back they did that with The Sopranos, with the last season. Mm-hmm. And the reason they gave then was that as long as it's the same seasons, the actors can't renegotiate their salaries. So by calling it season 5-1 and season 5-2, that would mean that they wouldn't risk the actors demanding a higher paycheck.
Ah.
I don't know if that's true now, but that was what I read about it when it happened to The Sopranos.
That's a very good point, Hans. I never even considered that. And it's interesting because, I don't think we've ever really found out, or maybe it's been stated, but I don't remember off the top of my head how long the cast originally signed for how many seasons. But if they signed for 5, then that would totally make sense why they're calling this season 5 part 2 for business reasons. But for show history reasons, to me, this is season 6, regardless of what they say. Anyhow, looking forward to it. And hopefully, because it had so much foreknowledge, we're going to get a good wrap up to the season, and it's not going to turn out to be like a Dead Zone season 5 kind of situation.
No, and it was a little bit differently described, because the first report of it being cancelled was that after it had finished shooting the season, it was cancelled. But when I talked to Lloyd Segan, the man behind the show, he told me that it got the ending that they were planning for it. So according to him, they actually got to end the show as they wanted.
Good.
And that is good.
Absolutely.
We don't like it when they end a show in just being cancelled and not giving it a proper ending.
That's right.
And the next news item is the everlasting It remake, and this time it's actually not a progress on the remake, more of a statement from Cary Fukunaga on why he left his version. And it seems like it's less and less about the money issue and more about what he wanted to do with the show, or the the two films. And the company really didn't have the same thoughts about it as he had. And he said that you can try to make the other person who you want them to be, but it's impossible really to change. You just have to work. And apparently they wanted different things and couldn't agree on what they wanted to do with it, and he left. So it's not as much about the money, I guess, as was reported earlier.
Yeah, it's two parties not sharing the same vision is ultimately what it comes down to. It's just unfortunate that they couldn't work it out, because I really do like the concept of the way he sets us up with the two movies. And I don't know if that's going to continue with the new people that they're bringing in to do that, whether they're going to stick with that vision, or more than likely there'll probably be a rewrite, and we might even not have two movies, might just drop to one long movie, which would be too bad, at least from my perspective. I know some people actually prefer that if it's done that way. How about you, Hans? Would you like one movie or two?
No, I would prefer two movies. And I like the idea of setting it up with the kids in the first one and the adults in the second. And I read also that Fukunaga wanted to do it that way and give it time to introduce the characters.
Yeah.
And I think that was what the company was objecting against, that they thought it might be a bit slow with all the introduction of the characters. And in one way I can see what they mean, because if you don't know the book and you don't know the story and you're just going to watch this with no prior knowledge to it, it might seem a bit slow. Personally, though, I would prefer it that way and give it a proper introduction to the characters. But if you look at it from the company trying to sell the movie to fans or people that aren't fans of Stephen King and maybe not knowing about the book and what it's about, I think that might be what they are worried about.
Oh, for sure. It's even though it's one of his probably more famous and best liked books, I think it runs 1-2 with The Stand. But for the average movie-going public, when they go to see a horror movie, they expect to see a whole story, and to be told, like at the end of this first movie, that come back next year for part 2.
Yeah.
For the average moviegoer, that might be like, are you serious? I want my money back.
Yeah.
But I think as a Stephen King fan, I prefer as much time as possible to tell the story. And I just love the idea of splitting the movie's story into two movies, one for the kids and one for the adults. But I don't know if that's going to survive with this next crew, but we'll have to see.
I'm not actually convinced that the movie will survive at all. I think it might just be nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, sad but true. All right.
Yep.
Up next, still with TV, and this time, even though Under the Dome and Haven are going off TV this year, we do have a new series to look forward to for at least one season, and that is, of course, 11/22/63. And it's reported on Hans' site back on August 20th. It looks like James Franco is actually going to direct an episode of the series, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't know how much directing experience he's had, but I think for this type of a story, which is not really special effects heavy, I think it'll be okay if he does that. And this might be one of the episodes where he's not in it very much. Maybe it's an episode that focuses on Lee Harvey Oswald or something like that. So I don't have any problems with it, and it's a good opportunity for him, and I hope he knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, and I have said it before, but I say it again, that I have so high hopes for this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think this one can be really great.
Mm-hmm.
Both because it's determined that it will only be one season, so we know that it won't drag out and be like another series we know that have dragged out, and it's more of a documentary feel to it than anything supernatural, so it won't risk getting silly or not having the proper money to do the special effects and they will look bad and things like that. So I think it has every chance of being a real success.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Next news item is that King has written an introduction to a book called The Rim of Morning, 2 Tales of Cosmic Horror by William Sloan. Personally, I don't know very much about this book or this author at all, but it seems to be a book that King likes. And it's being released on October 6th. And Stephen is one of several writers who have praised the book, or rather stories. I don't know, is it a collection?
It's just 2 stories, yeah.
2 stories, yeah. So it looks like something he likes, and has written a introduction to it. And of course, his name is on the cover. It's smaller than the author's, but it's still there.
Which is only right.
Yeah.
He's only doing
of
the
course.
intro. He didn't write the book, so.
Yep. So if you want to check out that, it'll be out in a few weeks.
Yeah, this is kind of cool when authors do this. This is probably somebody that King ran across during his school days. I think I've heard of the name, or maybe I'm confusing with somebody else, but I have never read these two stories, and just reading the descriptions of what the stories are about sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So if King likes it, then I'm definitely interested in checking it out. So I could see that the Kindle version of this book is only like $7.50, which isn't too bad. There's also a paperback version that's going to be about $10 US. So it's always interesting to just discover other writers, and I'm sure this must have had some sort of influence on King. And I guess when we get to see the book and read the introduction, we'll find out exactly what those influences were.
Yep, exactly.
So cool stuff.
Yep.
And some Dark Tower news. Yes. Remember that thing? So this is just recent. Hans has put this up at his site. You can look for it around September 6th posting. And it has more to do with what King would have done. He was asked several questions in it from a New York Times interview. And one of the questions had to do around whether or not if he would have let another writer take over a series like The Dark Tower. And I don't know why this reader asked this question, to be honest, because the series is finished. So it's kind of like, dude, did you read this? Have you read all the books yet? Because it's like he's waiting for it to be finished or something. Or maybe he got confused because, spoiler, the story, book 7, takes rolling back to the beginning of the first book. I don't know. So it's kind of an odd question.
Yeah, maybe he's thinking of Wind Through the Keyhole. That was published after the series was finished. So maybe he's thinking about a book like that. Yeah,
they might have cut off the question and didn't include that part, but maybe that's what he meant. So that I guess maybe the reader was trying to find out whether or not King had other books he was going to write that revisited the Dark Tower series at some point, but it doesn't sound like it from King's response, at least from that perspective. And he also said that outside of the Dark Tower series with Roland and the Hodges trilogy, he doesn't really repeat his characters that often. So beyond that, he says that once he's gone, it'll be up to his family, and he trusts their judgment in it. So it's again a situation, never say never, but I'd be very surprised if his family would allow somebody else to ghostwrite books building off of or using his previously published work as a sort of like a springboard to new stories about these characters. I don't think that will happen at all.
No, we had actually a similar case here in Sweden because with Stieg Larsson.
Yes.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The different author wrote a fourth book that was just released here. I think it was released in a lot of countries. Mm-hmm. And it was not without harsh word between I don't think she's his wife, but they live together, and his brothers who's okayed the book. So it's been turbulent. Yeah. One interesting thing that several readers pointed out after I posted this, is that King has let someone else write about the Dark Tower at least a bit with the Marvel comics.
Yeah.
I don't know how much influence he has now. In the beginning, I know he was very much involved with the plot line, and then someone else put it together and made the comic. But I think he was okaying everything and had the main influence on it. But I don't know how it is today, because now they are mainly making comics of the existing books, I think. I haven't read the comics in a while now, so I'm not updated on it. But I think some new things were in the early comics, but I think King was in control of that, so I don't think he has left it over to someone else.
Yeah, I think it's Robin Firth, right?
Yeah.
I mean, King's basically handed that over to her, and beyond some general points, I think if push came to shove and King got the idea for another book that didn't go or went against something that the comics had done, they would just say, well, the comics are like an alternative vision and they're not canon. And I think if King had a story that went against the comics, he would just write the story and say, well, the books are the books and the comics are the comics. What I write is canon. What's in the comics is just like an alternative world. It's kind of like the way Disney has wiped out all the previous Star Wars fiction and said
Yeah.
from this point going forward, anything that we publish will be considered canon, but all the stuff that happened between the original movies and the movies that Disney are making and the prequels, none that stuff is all alternative universe stuff and is not canon anymore. So, but yeah.
Exactly. Next up, and this is really interesting news. King received the National Medal of Art from President Barack Obama on September 10th. And that's a real honor for him.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of others, actors and writers and a lot of other fields as well, who received the medal. And I think King was really honored with it. He looked really honored when he got it, and he had the suit and tie and was really well dressed. I'm not complaining of his dressing code, but usually he had a t-shirt on, so he had dressed up for Obama.
Yes, he had.
Yep, and there's a video on it of it, and you can check out everybody who got a medal.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I haven't seen much of Obama living in Sweden here and stuff, but he was really funny in his speech afterwards.
Yeah.
He mentioned that he would get a couple of signed books and a lot of other stuff. So he seemed to really enjoy it. And I don't know how those who got the medals, how they were selected. I guess it wasn't the president himself who did it.
No, I believe there's some sort of committee that is tracking work by people, and they decide based on I guess they evaluate people that get nominated for it and decide who gets it. So I watched the whole ceremony. It's a lot of these other people are doing humanitarian work, so they're it's not all just entertainers. So like I think Sally Field was the only actor. And I think King and maybe 2 or 3 other people were writers, like Larry McMurphy of the Lonesome Dove Cowboy series that was turned into a miniseries was also there. But then there was a lot of like art people and musicians and just people that work in social services and things like that. So it's quite a cross section of different people. But the bottom line is all these people have done work that has made the world a better place and made the U.S. a better country for the works that they've done, whether it's been humanitarian works or works in the entertainment or art fields. So it was really cool to watch it. It was quite touching because some of the people are quite old. So, you know, they're sort of some of them are in wheelchairs and whatnot. So this is a lifetime work award for them. And same with King. I only wish that there was less people, nominees or recipients of the awards, because it would have been cool for King to get up there and make have time to make a speech or something like that. But obviously, with the number of people getting all those medals, they couldn't have everyone make a speech, or it would have been longer than an Academy Awards. So, but it was cool to see him up there. He looks a suit does not look like his natural attire by any stretch of the imagination. But,
no.
But you know, it was funny. The president mentioned Misery and Carrie. He talked more about McMurphy's books than he did about King's book, which is interesting. I don't know if he's a Western fan or not, but yeah. So it was a great ceremony, and it's a nice capper for King, a nice bit of recognition. And when we get to a later story, we can talk about the medal a bit more. Yeah,
and it was I enjoyed seeing the poor man who held up every medal. Before the president gave them out. I mean, he really looked. He had a stone face. He didn't change his face expression at all.
No.
And I think he should have a medal just for that, being able to do that.
Yeah, he's like a cousin to one of those British guards that wears a big furry hats.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he should have a small medal to recognize his work, I think.
Yes. All right.
Yep.
Turning to the stage. And
yes,
I know that everybody has infatuations with media type people, but it doesn't sound like getting in bed with Bruce Willis would be the most warm experience based on this interview that was published by who published this? It was a New York Times article by Alexis Solasky, and you can see the article up at Hans' site on September 11th. And unfortunately, this type of article, the tone of it has come up before in regards to Bruce Willis, that he tends to be rather cold during interviews or withdrawn. So you kind of wonder, like, why are you bothering to do it in the first place? Or is it in his contract that he has to do it because he's promoting the play.
Yeah.
But it didn't sound like he was very interested in talking about what was, how he's getting ready to perform in the play. And which is too bad because I really like Bruce Willis. I think he's a good actor.
Yeah.
And he's done some interesting work. And not just the Die Hard movies and that, but I really liked Unbreakable. I thought he was awesome in that movie. And it's just would have been nice to get some insights into it because, like James Caan, he's generally a very physical actor. So for him to be playing this role on stage where he's basically lying in bed for 85% of the play is going to be interesting. And I really be curious to see how well this is received, because even if he gives a good performance, the problem is he's so far away from the audience. How well are they going to be able to see his facial expressions, because he can't walk around the stage and jump around and wave his hands in that, right? He can only really just move his face or use his face to express a lot of things. So and if you can't see that, like on a movie screen, you can get close-ups, right? So you can see the actor's face. Yeah. But this, you're going to be sitting if you're in the back of the theater, how are you going to be able to tell what he's doing? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I hope it turns out well, but I'm going to be very curious to hear, and hopefully some of our listeners will be attending the play and will be able to tell us what they thought of it and how well Bruce Willis captured this character's immobility in bed.
Yeah, this is actually one play that I would really, really want to see. I have seen the Misery performed here in Sweden twice.
Cool.
Yeah, and actually one time was a bit more amateur theater, but still really good. And the second time, the actress who played Annie was the same actress who played Pippi Longstocking.
Oh yeah, you mentioned
in the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a bit bizarre, but it was still a good play. And I think Bruce Willis will be great in this one. I think he will be able to perform. But as you say, it's sad that he is not very friendly with journalists. But on the other hand, I think the article wasn't really well written. I think I was pretty disappointed when I read it because it mainly focused on what Bruce Willis had done in the past. It said something like, "Oh, he will be doing blah blah blah," and because he has done that in those and those and those movies and stuff like that. So it didn't really present anything new, and I can't imagine that even though Bruce Willis wasn't very willing to talk, the writer or the journalist actually said that she was with him for an hour, and he must have said something more during an hour than those few lines that we actually got in the article. And I think that the journalist really presented Bruce Willis as someone who didn't want to cooperate and stuff. And I feel that it's, even though it's wrong for Bruce Willis to do that, I think it's a bit unprofessional to make such a big point of it in an article. I think she could have mentioned it, but it got really tired after a while, I think, and I think it could have been better done. So, well, I don't know. It's what I was mostly disappointed in was that it didn't really say much about anything new about the play, and I would have liked to hear more about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, if Bruce Willis by any chance is listening to this, he can contact us, and we will be happy to bring him on this show, and he will get the chance to make his voice heard, and we will not be sad or mad if he is a bit grumpy, right?
That's right, yeah. So come on, Bruce, how can you turn down an offer like that?
Yeah.
So what else have we got here?
Last thing is that King showed up on The Late Show, and this is a bit surprising because usually he does these things when he's releasing a new book, which he isn't doing at the moment. He will later, but that is still 2 months away. I don't really know if he was there because of the medal, because it was announced that he was going to be there before it was announced that he got the medal. So, but maybe The Late Show had some insight to it and know it before we did. But anyhow, I think that was one of the most enjoyable interview he has done in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that well, King is never boring to listen to, but the journalists are often asking the same questions as the one before and the one before and the one before. And I think that Stephen Colbert actually managed to ask some interesting questions, and they talked about his medal a bit, and he asked about the critics that when King started was really hard on him. And I think it was really funny when King said that, well, most of those reviewers are dead now.
Yeah.
And the ones reviewing my books now have read me since they were young, so I get them while they're young.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that King was in a good mood, and Stephen Colbert asked the right kind of questions, I think.
Yep.
So I think in all, it was a rather short but a very good segment, I think.
Yeah, it was well done. I liked the picture they took of all his books stacked up. That was pretty cool. It's like 6.5 feet.
Yep.
So that was cool. Yeah, King looked like he has fun, and I think he got on there because I think he's been a big fan of Colbert. So they just probably said, well, he's in the area. Why don't we just ask him or whatever, right? So
yeah,
I think it just worked out. And though we didn't mention it in the news, but the night before, as you mentioned, King did do that presentation with Lee Child, who writes the Jack Reacher series, and that have not seen a video up for that yet.
No, I read that there would be a video. I read that they were going to post one, but I haven't seen it either. So hopefully it will be.
Which
coming.
Is too bad, because I'd like to see it. There's, general impressions from the Stephen King forum there, as usual, pretty positive. King, they had a good time, and King was, both of them, him and Lee Child were very entertaining. I think King got asked a few questions, which I was really curious about, because it's supposed to be King is the host. He's not the guest, so he's not the one that's supposed to be asked questions. It's supposed to be for Lee Child, but the chances of Stephen King fans being there as well. So I hope that video does come up, because I'd like to see how many questions he did get. But until we do get that video, Hans, you put up some links one day too to a bunch of interviews with King from around 1989, which I had never seen before, which were very cool. And there's 2 or 3 videos there, classic King. You can see it on Hans' site, September 5th. And these are from 1989, when King was in his prime, physically still, and really looks like Joe Hill.
Yep.
But they're great interviews. I have no idea where they came from. Unfortunately, the person that's put them up never really said where he found these interviews. So I don't know who did them originally, but they're pretty cool. So definitely worth checking out.
Yep. Yeah, and stuff like this tends to pop up from now and then on the internet, and nobody really knows where they come from time to time. But I think a lot of stuff are from TV that's been recorded on old videotapes, and then people finding them in their boxes and transferring them into their computer, and they post them on the net and stuff like that. So I think it's stuff like this that pops up from time to time, and it's really interesting to see a couple of years later to see how it was back then.
Yeah, and I can't help thinking, because people always say, well, how popular do you think somebody will be like in 50 years from now or 100 years from now when they're gone? And I don't think definitively that videos like this will help cement King's future readership, but he's probably one of the first writers that's been so well documented outside of his books. Like, he's a personality in his own right that if you do a little bit of searching, you can find a lot of video stuff about him, a lot of interviews that he's done. So you get a much more feeling of the writer as a person, whereas opposed to like if you pick up a book like a Sherlock Holmes book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Ray Bradbury or Isaac Asimov, there's not as much video of these guys, so you don't really know them as people or get a chance to see what they look like in real life. So it'll be curious to see if these kind of things will help King's longevity into the future after he's done writing and there's no more new material coming out. So I could be very curious, because he's really come across as a very comfortable person to be on the stage and do interviews and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that through history, author hasn't been that well filmed. I mean, it's like King used to say sometimes that they are sitting all up by themselves writing, and it's not like movie stars or musicians and stuff like that who are in front of people all the time. So I think King is one of the most authors who have been most public as well, even though he might not like it, but I think he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if that's going to play a part in his longevity going forward, but we'll have to see. It's interesting anyhow. Always fun to watch him, that's for sure.
Yeah. He's really he can really take a crowd, and it's always enjoyable to see him speak.
Yeah. Especially when he's making references about a certain guy with bad hair. But anyhow, we're not going into politics. That's not what we're all about.
Nope.
So that is the news for this episode.
Yes.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the Nightshift.
And now we're going to talk about the collection of short stories that were put together in the King's first collection of short stories ever published, which was the Nightshift collection, which is where we've taken our name for reviews that we do. And this book was published in 1978. I'll just quickly read through the list here. Jerusalem's Lot, Quitters Inc., The Woman in the Room, Last Rung on the Ladder, Battleground, Children of the Corn, I Am the Doorway, I Know What You Need, Graveyard Shift, Sometimes They Come Back, One for the Road, Trucks, The Mangler, Strawberry Spring, Gray Matter, The Lawnmower Man, The Man Who Loved Flowers, Night Surf, The Boogeyman, and The Ledge.
That's 20 stories.
20. Quite a collection.
Yes.
So it's interesting. I went back and read this and prepped for this podcast, and it was very interesting going back to read this stuff because you can definitely tell it's early King compared to his later stuff. But the core elements of what makes his writing so good, the characters and his ability to weave a good tale are in evidence. Some of the stories might be a little more awkward or clunky than his later stuff, but it's an interesting, you can see if you reread that collection and then compare it to his later work, you can definitely see the evolution of this writer over time. So I really enjoyed reading it again. And Hans, I know you didn't reread the collection, but do you have any general thoughts about the collection? Maybe the book cover or what you thought of it, things like that?
Yeah, it's classic King when it comes to short stories. And it's interesting to see because you kind of forget how old this book is. I was looking through the list of stories and found on Wikipedia the origin, where they came from and when they were written, and 2 of the stories are actually written before 1970, and most others are written in the first couple of years in the 70s. So they are pretty old stories. And stories like Jerusalem's Lot, Quitters Inc., Last Rung on the Ladder, and The Woman in the Room. Those 4 were actually new stories when this one was published. And I mean, those have always been King stories to us, at least to me. So it says something about how long ago it was this book was published, and it still hold its grounds. So,
yeah, I mean, it's almost 40 years old, this collection.
yeah.
It's unbelievable when you think about it.
Yeah. About the cover, at least the one that I think is the first US cover, just had a text, Nightshift, and Stephen King, his name, and a red line around it with a kind of a blood drip at the end of it. And it's not his most exciting cover, I must say. I don't know how well this was received back then, but it's not, when you see it, it's not something that you are automatically drawn to, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's, for me, the only cover that I really know it by is the bandaged hand.
Yeah.
With the finger, with the some of the fingers partially exposed, and there's all these eyes all over the hand.
Yeah.
So that's the cover I know, and even though it's it's the story I Am the Doorway, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's not one of the stronger stories in the book by any imagination, but that image of the hand with all those eyes in it is one that's right up there for me with the silver cover for The Shining or Cujo, or which has like the flame and then the sort of the face drawn behind it of the white cover. So it's definitely one of the more iconic covers for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have, when started out collecting King, this was one of the hardest books to get in a Swedish translation, because it was released in so few copies. and for a very long time I was missing it from my collection. So I even lent it on my public library and took it home and placed it in my bookcase just to have the collection complete. And I had it stand there for, I don't know, maybe how long you can have it, like a month or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And then I had to return it. So, but for a month there, my collection was complete. And finally they re-released it. Yeah, they re-released it later on.
And what cover does it have?
It has a different cover. It's actually a Swedish cover that's made for the Swedish book. It's a skull on it and stuff like that. So it's pretty nice cover. And the Swedish title is Deathbed, if you translate it to English.
Okay.
So I had a little story with that book when I started out collecting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good collection. It has good stories. A lot of them has been filmed.
Yep.
And we have Graveyard Shift has been filmed.
Mm-hmm.
The Mangler has been filmed 3 times. Battleground was included in Nightmares and Dreamscapes, the TV series. Trucks has been filmed twice. Once as Maximum Overdrive. Sometimes They Come Back has 3 movies.
Mm-hmm.
The Lawnmower Man has 2 movies. Children of the Corn
has a million movies.
Yeah. But I think the movie that I think has made the strongest impression on me on this is actually The Woman in the Room by Frank Darabont.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually the first dollar baby that was done.
One of the first, yeah.
Yeah, that one and The Last Rung on the Ladder and The Lawnmower Man. Yeah. Those 3 were the first. Frank Darabont did The Woman in the Room, and it has some truth from King's growing up with his mother getting sick and stuff like that. So I think it gives it an extra dimension. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good, and I think that one also made King very happy, and that's why Frank Darabont has gotten the chance to do all the King movies he's done.
Yeah, and 2 of the stories were in Cat's Eye trilogy. I know Quitters Inc. And The Ledge.
The Ledge.
And I don't know the cat one. That was.
Yeah, that's the General. It was written directly for the movie, so it's not based on the previous story.
Yeah, and I remember like back when videotapes were first coming out, and you used to go to the video store or whatnot to rent movies. One of our variety stores actually had The Woman in the Room on videotape, which was kind of surprising because part of the thing about dollar babies is that they're not supposed to be commercially available. So it was always interesting that one, and now I kick myself because I never got that movie again, and I really wanted to have it later on, but you can't find that videotape anywhere. So I would have loved to have asked that store owner if I could have bought that movie from him, but because I don't even know if it's available anymore.
No, I actually have that videotape.
Oh yeah.
Not that exact videotape that you saw that, but one of it. Yeah, and it has a really interesting cover because it's I think the videotape is called The Woman in the Room.
Yep.
And on the front of it there's a woman going through a door.
Yes, that's the cover.
And you see her face and her arms coming out through the door. So it's quite a misleading cover and strange cover.
Yeah.
But I also one of the movies, actually Dollar Babies, The Lawnmower Man. I don't know if you have seen it.
No, I haven't.
That one is actually really good because it follows the story.
Okay.
And you actually have a man running after a lawnmower eating the grass, and it's it's a great movie, short movie.
Yeah, and in general, I would say for a lot of these in this collection, these are short stories, so they're very much like your typical short horror stories. They're very quick to the punch, and they really go for the throat. So something like Children of the Corn or Graveyard Shift plays very much quicker in these short stories and are a lot more creepier than the movie versions that came from them later. So, and I think that's just generally, if you're making a movie based on a short story, you have to add material, and sometimes it's not for the better.
Yep. Just
wanted to mention that, though I think the ones that worked better, like I mentioned earlier, like The Ledge and Quitters Inc. worked better because they were part of like an anthology. So there was like a couple of episodes in one movie, so they worked better that way.
Yeah. So should we tell everybody what Facebook readers liked for stories in the book before we tell them our picks?
Start. Do you have them like 1, 2, 3? Or
no, I actually have the ones who got most votes.
Okay, so do you know the third one?
Yes, the third one was One for the Road.
Oh, interesting.
That one is on third place, and the first place was actually a split between two stories. Strawberry Spring and Jerusalem's Lot.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting choices. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I think, almost the most of the stories got some votes, or maybe not all of them, but many. But those were the top 3.
Okay.
Stories.
Well, that's interesting because none of those are my picks. I'll give my number 3, and then you can give yours. How about
yes?
My number 3 pick would be Quitcher's Ink. I really like that, and maybe it's I'm colored because of a movie adaptation was done of it, but I really like that whole idea about the hardcore actions being taken if you want to quit smoking and want to lose weight and whatnot. I thought that was a really smartly written piece.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more because I have that as number 3 as well.
Okay, well then what's your number? And why did you like it so much?
Yeah, it's the same. I think it really shows how much you have to put in to succeed in that, and it's also a little bit over the top, but I think it's a visually good story, and you can really, both from the written story and from the short film.
Right.
It's a visual story where you can visualize what's happening.
Okay, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is The Lawn Mover Man. Because I really like it. I think it's such a weird story and such a strange story. And
it is.
You know me, and I like that kind of stories.
Yeah.
I just think it's a good, fun read of a really crazy story. I hate the movie though, with Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah, well, it's hardly bears any resemblance to the story.
No, exactly. So, but I think the short story is a great one.
All right, my number 2 pick is The Ledge. I just think that is a really tight, intense, and scary story, and I guess because I have a thing for heights to begin with, that whole idea of being up on the ledge that high, and I just love the way how the story ends as well. So I just think it's a really well written piece of tense terror. Yeah,
it's a good one. And your number 1 is?
My number 1 is Battleground, and again I might be colored by the Nightmares and Dreamscapes adaptation of it, but I just like the whole idea of those little soldiers and those little jeeps and whatnot coming to life and battling it out with this antagonist. And I just think it's a really, really well-written piece again.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more again, because I also have that one as number 1.
So that's interesting. You and I had more overlap than the readers, who picked 3 totally different stories, which is fantastic. I mean, it just shows that there's something for everybody in this. Jerusalem's Lot, I toyed with that one for a while, but it's written in that King really trying to ape like the old style horror stories and that, and it just ultimately knocked it down a peg for me because of that. But yeah, I mean, some of the other stories were close to, like, I like Trucks, and like Graveyard Shift, again, way better than the movie, though I think it shows some of the awkwardness of King's early writing, because I just didn't buy the fact that this guy would be that so pissed off at his foreman that he would still want to go down into this next level, which is like, just as soon as you open the door, that's seriously bad stuff down there. I don't think you could stay that mad at somebody that you'd walk into hell. But it's a much tighter story than the movie, and it is, from a terror perspective, it's really well written, but it was just really hard to buy them going down into that last level. But
and it's interesting as well, because I think that we are looking upon these stories quite different from when it was released, because
for sure
now these are oldies.
Yes.
And it shows King in his prime when he was young and upcoming, and when it was published, it was where he was then. So I think, and everything was different back then. So I think that we are more critical to it now because we have seen everything is done afterwards.
Absolutely.
So it would be interesting if there is one or a couple of readers listeners who were actually getting this as it was released. I know I wasn't. I was only 8 years old, so I think if I read it all, I think it was comics back then. So, but it would be interesting to know what you thought about it when it was released. And as you mentioned, the stories are pretty short, and this book is, at least according to Wikipedia, 336 pages divided into 20 stories. That isn't a lot per story.
No.
So it's a bit different. I think King writes longer short stories today than he did back then.
Yeah. Like you could tell he wasn't established when this collection came out, because a lot of these are probably, if he had written them later on, they would have been a lot longer. And I think some of them could use being a bit more length to them to flesh them out a bit more. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with a quick jab of a horror story either. So, and I know a lot of people would probably argue the other way around, that they say that King should be edited down more so that most of his stories are of this length. So what I enjoy most, or maybe not most, but a lot when I read older short stories or older book as well, is to see where King came from and see how you get an idea of how he has evolved and added stuff to his writing. So it's like a history lesson almost going back. And I think that is something we have that they didn't have when the book was released, obviously. So that gives an extra twist to these older stories. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think I enjoy that when I read them.
Alrighty, so thanks a lot to everybody who responded to Hans's question on Facebook.
It's just a jump to the left.
And we're just going to now do a Stephen King Revisited, which also happens to coincide with our review of Nightshift, which is the book that they talked about. And if you go over there, there's 3 articles there. The first one is the historical one that they always do before Richard Chizmar does his review, and Vincent sets up the history of Nightshift and covers a lot of the material that Hans just mentioned. It also talks about the fact that it mentions some of the stories that were not put in this collection. Blue Air Compressor, It Grows on You, The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands, Survivor Type, and The Wedding Reception, which was later published as The Wedding Gig. His agent at that time, Bill Thompson, referred to those too much as Stephen the Student Writer stories, and he also said that Survivor Type was too grisly, but we know that that story was published later on. And this was a period of King's career where Doubleday, who was publishing his books, they didn't want to publish more than one book by him a year. So while he was in between working on The Stand, they decided to release this book. And interesting note that the book was, introduction was done by John D. MacDonald, who of course is the most famous for his Travis McGee novels. There's a great forward. And one of the things I love about King's collections is when he was able to start putting forwards into his books. And this is no more true than it is for Nightshift, where he talks about these, and we mentioned how short some of these stories are, and he calls them one reel horror movies, which is really cool. And this this collection was what became responsible for the Dollar Babies. And so that's kind of cool to find out as well. And of course, we mentioned already about Frank Darabont and The Woman in the Room.
Yeah.
And so that sets up the historical context for the book. Again, you can go over to Stephen King Revisited and see that. And the guest essay is particularly interesting for me because it's done by Brian Keene. And Hans, I don't know if you know who Brian Keene is.
No, I haven't actually read anything about him.
Yeah,
him.
He's a fellow horror writer, and he's a big zombie writer. And his 2 big zombie books are The Rising and City of the Dead. So if anybody, including you, Hans, are into zombie stuff, they should really read these 2 books because these are lean, mean zombie type stories. And the cool thing about these zombie stories books actually is the second book is a continuation of the first, but the zombies in these books are not just restricted to people. So if you think of any scenarios with animals and things like that, it's probably in these books. So it's a very nihilistic dark view of zombies. It even makes like The Walking Dead like Happy Days in comparison. I mean, it's bad enough when you're fighting fellow humans that are zombies, but you can imagine when you have to worry about animals as well. It's unbelievable. So he has a great column up here, and he talks about his childhood, and he was into the comics at that time, Man-Thing, Hunter of the Swamp, and then he ran across Stephen King's Lawnmower Man, done as a comic in Bizarre Adventures. So if you want to check that out, the cover is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then once he ran across that comic book, then he found out about Nightshift, and he of course read that. He says the cast of Grey Matter, who could have very well been members of my family. And again, Brian mentions the foreword by King, which put up forth the idea that he talked about writing for a living, which is what sparked the first inklings to Brian Keene that he could do the same thing. So I think these two columns are very interesting and setting up and showing the impact that King had on so many people, and he influenced Brian Keene into becoming a writer, and the tie through the book was to the comics. So that's a pretty cool column as well. And then of course we have Richard Chizmar's thoughts about it. And again, he's someone who's read this book over and over again. And I really do think that the shortness of these stories for when you're of that age, Hans, like if we would have read these, you probably were, I don't know, how many years ago did you read this collection? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's probably about 10, 15 years.
Okay, that's pretty late then, because I've read them earlier. Yeah. But when you're younger, like a teenager in your early 20s, these short stories really sing for you.
Yeah, I read it the first time much earlier.
So I think that to read these stories when you're younger and you can get through a whole bunch of them, it's kind of like a comic book collection in a way. Right? Compared to reading his novels and that. These stories really made an impression on a lot of people because there were so many of them and they were all so different. And even something like The Mangler, which was made into a terrible movie, if you read it in the book, it's so much more scary because King really makes that piece of laundry equipment a character that comes to life, literally in the story. But also, it's not just like a big monster with no motivations or anything like that. King makes it into a character that you can understand what it's doing. So I highly recommend these 3 columns to help you place some context around the collection, because especially now, like Hans said, like to reread this now, 20 years later, 30 years later, or whenever you've read this, and just the times are different too. So a lot of the things that King were doing here are cutting edge, creepy stuff you see now on kids monster shows, Saturday morning cartoons or whatever. So these columns are very helpful to give you a perspective of what it was like when the book was first released. So check them out. They're well worth it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear the background of stuff. I really like that. So
absolutely.
Which stories were considered being included and why they weren't and stuff like that, because it might have been a quite different book if other stories had been included. And so I think it's interesting to hear how the stuff were done and how they thought when they did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you have a tendency to treat things like equally, and you treat like a book that you got that was released this year against something that was released 30 years ago. But if you really want to get a proper or a more of a depth of that book, I think you really do need to sort of set it up a little bit in your head as to what the times were like when that came out. And that also helps a lot of times when you're looking at older stuff and saying, this seems kind of corny or clunky, but then you have to compare it to not just when it was released, but what was being put out at the time it was being released, because often it's set a level, raised the bar on what horror stories were about. And when you come to it later on, the bar has been raised so much further from when it first came out that you're kind of looking back and saying, I've read scarier stuff that's newer. But yeah, of course. But that new stuff owes itself to the older stuff. And it's good to find out why. And those kind of columns that they do over at the Stephen King Revisited site do a great job of doing that. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see. I mean, the stories are so depending on what they are about, how they survive time. I mean, if something like Survivor Type might not be as different today than it was 40 years ago if you end up on an island without any food, and others might be very, very time typical, and the climate of how the government and everything like that. So it depends really on what story you're reading, if it feels old or if it doesn't. So I mean, if you're hungry, you're hungry.
Yeah. And the other cool thing about this collection is you can see the seeds for what became novels later on, like Jerusalem's Lot is the most obvious one, but that became the template upon which King built up Salem's Lot. So also, you can see germs of novels in these short stories.
Yeah. It's a great collection, and if you haven't already checked it out, you definitely should. And be forgiving for the time that has passed.
Yeah. And recognize that this was early in his career as well. And it's a great way to take this and compare it against something that he's written more recently. And you can see how much of a master he has really become, which is cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All righty. So that's what we've got for this episode. And we're not quite sure what our next podcast is going to be because we do have a tentative interview lined up, but that we need to confirm that. We also have an idea about just talking about all the stalled TV and movie adaptations that are currently out there. I mean, like what's happening with Cell? Like that movie was in the can for quite a while now. Like it should be coming out like this. It's almost Halloween, right? It's almost October. That's the perfect time to release that movie, but I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So
I thought it would be out now for Halloween, but I don't know what's happening with it.
Yeah.
Strange.
And then, of course, we're going to review Graveyard Shift, which unfortunately I didn't get a chance to watch it. It's my fault that we're not talking about this podcast, but we will be doing that, as well as we have one more final report for Under the Dome.
Yes. It is finished. The series has ended.
Yeah.
I have seen every episode. You have a few left.
Yes.
So for the next episode, we will almost for certain talk about that as well.
Yeah, either that or the interview that we're doing, or maybe both. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
So, and that will be our 50th as well. So I don't know. We'll have to do something special.
We have to make something special out of it. Maybe you listeners have some ideas of what we should do to celebrate.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just if we get enough readers' questions too, maybe we could just do like a mailbag episode or something like that.
That would be fun.
Just answer a bunch of questions if we get enough of them. That would be great. That would be fun. Make it a party for everyone.
Yeah, and I have the interview you mentioned. Just to be a little bit secretive, we won't mention who it is.
Okay.
But I did mention it on Facebook, so you can go there and check it out if you want. That person has a new book coming out, and he is giving us quite a few copies of it that we will give out in the podcast that we will do when we do the interview. Cool. And we will give it to people who ask questions for the person or for Lou and me. Wow. And if you do them by the SpeakPipe widget, you will have a lot bigger chance to get one of the books. Mm-hmm. And we actually already have 2 questions that way.
Oh,
so
cool.
Those will be included, and since there are more than 2 books we're giving out, those 2 people are having they have a big chance of getting one.
Right.
So get those questions in, and should we say who it is? Because they can't really ask questions if they don't know who it is.
Sure. It's up to you. I mean, you said you posted it on your Facebook page.
I posted on. I just
so they could go there.
Secret.
Or you could just say the name of the book, maybe. Or...
Yeah, I wanted to be a bit secretive, but it's getting too complicated now.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, the author is George Beam, who has written the Stephen King Companion, and we are going to give you a few of you copies of the book. And to get books, you have to ask questions for George that he can answer when we do the interview. So send those questions in, and we will pick a few of them, and a few of you will get his book.
Cool.
Yeah.
All righty. So there you go.
Yes.
Hope you all enjoyed this episode. And next one is the Big 5-0. Wow. Who would have thought we'd still be here after the first podcast? But here you go. 50 on the horizon, and the way things look, another 50 to come.
Yes, definitely.
All right. So, as always, stay safe.
But
Stay scared. Bye-bye.
bye.